Our chief and commander is fixing to speak on behalf of what has occurred today pertaining to ISIS that has planted a bomb that has wound up killing 12 of our military service men and women and injuring a great deal more. For those who have tried to put Joe Biden on a pedestal towards him being weak as a chief and commander, you need to really listen to this particular message that he has to say today to not only the Americans but to the world. I really feel for him. I have a great deal of empathy for Joe Biden because he inherited a 20-year war, first of all, something that I don't know that he had anything to do with, going all the way back after we got attacked in 9/11. And of course he inherited, it was almost like a setup, like he'd been framed. He inherited the agreement that Donald Trump had already made with our prevailing enemy pertaining to getting completely out of Afghanistan and handing the Afghanistan, I guess, back over to the Taliban. I ain't never heard nothing like this before. It's definitely different from a military strategy. If Americans is truly sincere in doing this, I would like to believe or hope that after we did get the various part of the American personnel out of there, of those who have sworn to help not only themselves but help America in establishing some sort of democracy in that area, I would hope that we would basically go in there, and I may not should say this as a Christian person, as a person that's supposed to have love and gentleness, but whenever you see people sacrificing what we're sacrificing for and basically getting our hands bitten off, they're biting the very hand that's trying to feed them simply because they do not want to reform, they do not want to progress, they do not want to do anything differently other than what they've been doing for the past thousands and thousands of years. You start figuring out that you're beating on a dead horse the way that you've been beating on this dead horse for the past 20 plus years. And I hate to say this, but I guess it's time for our United States Air Force to go in there with like some big 5,000 pound bombs and go to ripping them open. Because the whole thing has turned into nothing but a wild, wild west free-for-all. And I still base it off of what had occurred 30 plus years ago with Reagan and Mr. Bush, Mr. Senior Bush. Things wasn't properly handled in the United States government pertaining to that. And now we're all basically reaping the consequences of it. It's really sad because, you know, to be at one time is one of the greatest nations on the planet, not only militarily, but in every other aspect. And to think that we have been drawn down by our enemy in this aspect, it has a tendency of wearing on one's morals in who he or she truly is, especially after a day like today and losing 12 servicemen or women, I don't know which, and having multiple injuries. It's obvious that the Taliban has failed indirectly towards allowing for ISIS to be able to commit such of an act like this. I don't know what Joe Biden is going to do, but I do know that I've listened to maybe 3 to 4 minutes of his speech, and I liked it enough that I was willing to back it up and document it and put it out to my viewers. So please listen.
Jill and I, our hearts ache, like I'm sure all of you do as well, for all those Afghan families who lost loved ones, including small children, or been wounded in this vicious attack. And we're outraged as well as heartbroken. Being the father of a Army major who served for a year in Iraq, and before that was in Kosovo as a U.S. attorney for the better part of 6 months in the middle of a war. When he came home after a year in Iraq, he was diagnosed, like many, many coming home, with an aggressive and lethal cancer of the brain, who we lost. We have some sense, like many of you do, what the families of these brave heroes are feeling today. You get this feeling like you're being sucked into a black hole in the middle of your chest. There's no way out. My heart aches for you. But I know this. We have a continuing obligation, a sacred obligation to all of you, families of those heroes. That obligation is not temporary, it lasts forever. The lives we lost today were lives given in the service of liberty, the service of security, the service of others, in the service of America. Like their fellow brothers and sisters in arms who died defending our vision and our values in the struggle against terrorism, of the fallen this day, they're part of a great and noble company of American heroes. To those who carried out this attack, as well as anyone who wishes America harm, know this: we will not forgive. We will not forget. We will hunt you down and make you pay. I will defend our interests and our people with every measure at my command. Over the past few weeks, I know many of you are probably tired of hearing me say it, we've been made aware by our intelligence community that the ISIS-K, an arch enemy, the Taliban, people who were freed when both those prisons were opened, has been planning a complex set of attacks on the United States personnel and others. This is why, from the outset, I've repeatedly said this mission was extraordinarily dangerous, and on why I've been so determined to limit the duration of this mission. As General McKenzie said, this is why our mission was designed, this is the way it was designed to operate under severe stress and attack. We've known that from the beginning. And as I've been in constant contact with our senior military leaders, and I mean constant, round the clock, and our commanders on the ground throughout the day, they made it clear that we can and we must complete this mission, and we will. And that's what I've ordered them to do. We will not be deterred by terrorists. We will not let them stop our mission. We will continue the evacuation. I've also ordered my commanders to develop operational plans to strike ISIS-K assets, leadership, and facilities. We will respond with force and precision at our time, at the place we choose, in a moment of our choosing. Here's what you need to know. These ISIS terrorists will not win. We will rescue the Americans in there. We will get our Afghan allies out, and our mission will go on. America will not be intimidated, and I have the utmost confidence in our brave service members who continue to execute this mission with courage and honor to save lives and get Americans, our partners, our Afghan allies out of Afghanistan. Every day when I talk to our commanders, I ask them what they need. What more do they need, if anything, to get the job done? As they will tell you, I granted every request. I reiterated them today on 3 occasions that they should take the maximum steps necessary to protect our forces on the ground in Kabul. And I also want to thank the Secretary of Defense and the military leadership of the Pentagon and all the commanders in the field. There has been complete unanimity from every commander on the objectives of this mission and the best way to achieve those objectives. Those who have served through the ages have drawn inspiration from the book of Isaiah, when the Lord says, "Whom shall I send? Who shall go for us?" The American military has been answering for a long time. "Here I am, Lord, send me. Here I am, send me." Each one of these women and men of our armed forces are the heirs of that tradition of sacrifice, of volunteering to go in harm's way, to risk everything, not for glory, not for profit, but to defend what we love and the people we love. And I ask that you join me now in a moment of silence for all those in uniform and out, uniform, military and civilian, who have given the last full measure of devotion. Thank you. May God bless you all, and may God protect the troops and all those standing watch for America. We have so much to do. It's within our capacity to do it. We just have to remain steadfast. Steadfast. We will complete our mission, and we will continue after our troops have withdrawn to find means by which we can find any American who wishes to get out of Afghanistan. We will find them and we will get them out. Ladies and gentlemen, they gave me a list here. The first person I was instructed to call on was Kelly O'Donnell of NBC.
You have said leaving Afghanistan is in the national interest of the United States. After today's attack, do you believe you will authorize additional forces to respond to that attack inside Afghanistan? And are you prepared to add additional forces to protect those Americans who remain on the ground carrying out the evacuation operation?
I've instructed the military, whatever they need, if they need additional force, I will grant it. But the military, from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the commanders in the field, have all contacted me one way or another, usually by letter, saying they subscribe to the mission as designed to get as many people out as we can within the time frame that is allotted. That is the best way they believe to get as many Americans out as possible, and others. And with regard to finding, tracking down the ISIS leaders who ordered this, we have some reason to believe we know who they are, not certain. And we will find ways of our choosing without large military operations to get them wherever they are. Trevor, Reuters.
Thank you, Mr. President. There's been some criticism, even from people in your party, about the dependence on the Taliban to secure the perimeter of the airport. Do you feel like there was a mistake made in that regard?
No, I don't. Look, I think General McKenzie handled this question very well. The fact is that we're in a situation, we inherited a situation, particularly since, as we all know, that the Afghan military collapsed 11 days before, in 11 days, that it is in the interest of, as McKenzie said, in the interest of the Taliban, that in fact ISIS-K does not metastasize beyond what it is, number one. And number two, it's in their interest that we are able to leave on time, on target. And as a consequence of that, the major things we've asked them, moving back the perimeter, giving more space between the wall, stopping vehicles from coming through, etc., searching people coming through. It is not what you'd call a tightly commanded, regimented operation like the U.S. is, the military is, but they're acting in their interest. Their interest. And so, by and large, and I've asked the same question to military on the ground, whether or not it's a useful exercise, no one trusts them. We're just counting on their self-interest to continue to generate their activities. And it's in their self-interest that we leave when we said, and that we get as many people out as we can. Like I said, even in the midst of everything that happened today, over 7,000 people we've gotten out, over 5,000 Americans over. So it's not a matter of trust, it's a matter of mutual self-interest. And, but there is no evidence thus far that I've been given as a consequence by any of our commanders in the field that there has been collusion between the Taliban and ISIS in carrying out what happened today, both in front of the hotel and what is expected to continue for beyond today. Amir, Associated Press.
Thank you, Mr. President. You have spoken again powerfully about your own son and the weight of these decisions. With that in mind, and also what you've said, that the longer we stay, the more likelihood that there would be a major attack. How do you weigh staying even one more day, considering what's happened?
Because I think what America says matters. What we say we're going to do in the context in which we say we're going to do it, that we do it, unless something exceptional changes. There are additional American citizens. There are additional green card holders. There are additional personnel of our allies. There are additional SIV card holders. There are additional Afghans that have helped us. And there are additional groups of individuals that have been contacted us, from women's groups to NGOs and others, who have expressly indicated they want to get out and have gathered in certain circumstances in groups, on buses and other means. That still presents the opportunity for, in the next several days between now and the 31st, to be able to get them out. And our military, and I believe, to the extent that we can do that knowing the threat, knowing that we may very well have another attack, the military has concluded that's what we should do. I think they're right. I think they're correct. And after that, we're going to be in a circumstance where will be, I believe, numerous opportunities to continue to provide access for additional persons to get out of Afghanistan, either through means that we provide and/or are provided through in cooperation with the Taliban. They're not good guys, the Taliban. We're not suggesting that at all. But they have keen interest. As many of you have been reporting, they very much would like to figure out how to keep the airport open. They don't have the capacity to do it. They very much are trying to figure out whether or not they can maintain what is a portion of an economy that has become not robust, but fundamentally different than it had been. And so there's a lot of reasons why they have reached out, not just to us, but to others, as to why it would be continued in their interest to get more of the personnel we want to get out. We can locate them. Now, there's not many left that we can assess that want to come out. There's some Americans we've identified, we've contacted the vast majority of them, not all of them, who don't want to leave because they're dual nationals, they have extended families, etc. And there's others who are looking for the time. So that's why we continue. I'll take a few more questions, but you, sir.
I wanted to ask you,
That's okay.
you say that what America says matters. What do you say to the Afghans who helped troops who may not be able to get out by August 31st?
I say we're going to continue to try to get you out. It matters. Look, I know of no conflict as a student of history, no conflict where when a war was ending, one side was able to guarantee that everyone they wanted to be extracted from that country would get out. And think about it, folks. I think it's important. I know the American people get this in their gut. There are, I would argue, millions of Afghani citizens who are not Taliban, who did not actively cooperate with us as SIVs, who, if given a chance, they'd be on board a plane tomorrow. It sounds ridiculous, but the vast majority of people in communities like that want to come to America, given a choice. So getting every single person out can't be guaranteed by anybody because there's a determination all who wants to get out as well. At any rate, it's a process. I was really pointing to you, but you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. There are reports that U.S. officials provided the Taliban with names of Americans and Afghan officials to evacuate. Were you aware of that? Did that happen? And then, sir, did you personally reject a recommendation to hold or to recapture Bagram Air Force Base?
Here's what I've done let's answer the last question first. On the tactical questions of how to conduct an evacuation or a war, I gather up all the major military personnel that are in Afghanistan, the commanders, as well as the Pentagon. And I ask for their best military judgment. What would be the most efficient way to accomplish the mission? They concluded, the military, that Bagram was not much value added. that it was much wiser to focus on Kabul. And so I followed that recommendation. With regard to, there are certain circumstances where we've gotten information, and quite frankly, sometimes from some of you, saying you know of such and such a group of people are trying to get out, and they're on a bus, they're moving from other people, and this is their location. And there have been occasions when our military has contacted their military counterparts in the Taliban and said, this, for example, this bus is coming through with X number of people on it, made up of the following group of people. We want you to let that bus or that group through. So yes, there have been occasions like that. And to the best of my knowledge, in those cases, the bulk of that has occurred, they've been let through. But I can't tell you with any certitude that there's actually been a list of names. I know there may have been, but I know of no circumstance. It doesn't mean didn't exist. That here's the names of 12 people, they're coming, let them through. It could very well have happened. I'll take one more question. Wait. Let me take the one question from the most interesting guy that I know in the press. That's you.
Mr. President, there had not been a U.S. service member killed in combat in Afghanistan since February of 2020. You set a deadline, you pulled troops out, you sent troops back in, and now 12 Marines are dead. You said the buck stops with you. Do you bear any responsibility for the way that things have unfolded in the last 2 weeks?
I bear responsibility for fundamentally all that's happened of late. But here's the deal. You know, I wish you'd one day say these things. You know as well as I do that the former president made a deal with the Taliban that he would get all American forces out of Afghanistan by May 1. In return, the commitment was made, and that was a year before. In return, he was given a commitment that the Taliban would continue to attack others, but would not attack any American forces. Remember that? I'm being serious. No, I'm asking you a question. Because before... No, wait a minute. I'm asking you a question. Is that accurate, the best of your knowledge? What?
I don't think that the issue is, do you think that people have an issue with pulling out of Afghanistan or just the way that things have happened?
I think they have an issue that people are likely to get hurt. Some, as we've seen, have gotten killed, and that it is messy. The reason why, whether my friend will acknowledge it or has reported it, the reason why there were no attacks on Americans, as you said, from the date until I came into office, was because the commitment was made by President Trump, I will be out by May 1st. In the meantime, you agree not to attack any Americans. That was the deal. That's why no American was attacked.
Basically, you said you squarely stand by your decision to pull out.
Yes, I do, because look at it this way, folks. And I have another meeting for real. But imagine where we'd be if I had indicated on May the 1st, I was not going to renegotiate an evacuation date. We were going to stay there. I'd have only one alternative: pour thousands of more troops back into Afghanistan to fight a war that we had already won relative to the reason we went in the first place. I have never been of the view that we should be sacrificing American lives to try to establish a democratic government in Afghanistan, a country that has never once in its entire history been a united country and is made up, I don't mean this in a derogatory, made up of different tribes, who have never, ever, ever gotten along with one another. And so, as I said before, and this is the last comment I'll make, we'll have more chance to talk about this, unfortunately, beyond, because we're not out yet. If Osama bin Laden, as well as Al Qaeda, had chosen to launch an attack when they left Saudi Arabia out of Yemen, would we have ever gone to Afghanistan? Even though the Taliban completely controlled Afghanistan at the time, would we have ever gone? I know it's not fair to ask you questions, it's rhetorical, but raise your hand if you think we should have gone and given up thousands of lives and tens of thousands of wounded. Our interest in going was to prevent Al Qaeda from reemerging, first to get bin Laden, wipe out Al Qaeda in Afghanistan, prevent that from happening again. As I've said 100 times, terrorism is metastasized around the world. We have greater threats coming out of other countries, a heck of a lot closer to the United States. We don't have military encampments there. We don't keep people there. We have over-the-horizon capability to keep them from going after us. Ladies and gentlemen, it was time to end a 20-year war. Thank you so much.
A stressed president during a difficult time, still new to the job, but easily the darkest day of the still young Biden presidency. As Joe Biden started his remarks talking about these 12 souls we've lost today, these 12 U.S. Marines killed in the line of duty, killed on the job while saving the lives of others outside the gate of the airport in Kabul. He ended up with a four-square defense of his own position, his own decisions, and a bit of a history lesson over the past 20 years, supplying for the Fox News correspondent the only portion that he withheld in his question, and that had to do with the deal made with the Taliban by the previous administration. We have two new guests to bring into the conversation who've been watching all of this with us. Peter Baker, Chief White House Correspondent with the New York Times, and Greg Myrie, NPR Net.
Desperate to get out of that country right now. What are you hearing?
And a quickly shrinking time window. I don't think there's any question about.
Well, how do we rescue the 1,000 Americans? By the way, the Secretary of State admitting that.
Do you think that people have an issue with pulling out of Afghanistan for just the way that things have happened?
I think that.
And Iran. Your thoughts on that?
From the White House when it happens, President Biden spoke about the service members killed and talked about getting others out of harm's way.
These American service members who gave their lives, it's an overused word, but it's totally appropriate here, were heroes. They were part of the bravest, most capable, the most selfless military on the face of the earth. And they're part of simply what I call the backbone of America.
Caddy, your view of what we heard from the president.
All that I just got through hearing was a grieving, stricken chief and commander that at the time that I was listening to it reminded me of Abraham Lincoln. But I also reflect upon the fact that it was not just bin Laden, regardless whether he fled to Afghanistan of the protection of the Taliban or ISIS. It was not just bin Laden that stood in the reflection of being a terrorist that conducted, promoted, financed, and masterminded 9/11. There is a deeper, fundamental core that has not yet been exploited. And that core is in fact the Saudi Arabians, where we know the vast majority of the great deal of them come from in their assignments towards trying to bring harm and hurt and destruction to the American people. And it's one thing if a group of people decides to go after another military force pertaining to military strategies. But they did not go after a military force. They actually went after the civilians of the United States, towards everyday Americans that should not have had to have suffered and died under the hand of this evil demonic entity that, as far as I am concerned, is still at large. Now, the original concept that America pursued in trying to, I'm going to use the word chastise the Afghanistan, not the Afghanistan, the Taliban people who was residing over in Afghanistan, was only part of the big picture. And there's no doubt that we successfully succeeded in that objective. But look at what it costed to do so. Trillions of dollars and thousands of lives. Trillions of dollars and thousands of dollars. Once more, if we would have went to the root core of who actually pursued this, for whatever motives, regardless whether it was the motives of oil, the motives of drugs, the motives of being in control of the drugs, the motives basically of being the top dog on the hill, we avoided going after the main perpetrators that now, after 30 plus years has went by, has even grown to be even stronger and more powerfuler and more influentialer pertaining to the Saudi Arabia government. There was tragic mistakes made. And whenever I say tragic mistakes made, it wasn't just about the 9 tapes that went to the White House pertaining to biblical Bible prophecy. There was tragedy, mistakes made that did not pursue in the proper format that it should have pursued in actually going after the core towards who masterminded 9/11. Now we know that there was Desert Storm and there was Desert Shield. And we know, according to the statistics, that Saddam Hussein was a ruthless dictator trying to dictate a ruthless group of people. We also know that whenever we remove Saddam Hussein, that, as history proves it, we actually done more damage to that area than we done good, because whenever we eliminated him, it created a vacuum for all these other known unknown terrorists, which, like I said, give or take about 67 or 70 of them, that inundated that area, that basically turned into nothing but a breeding ground for more terrorists. The problem began when 2 people that was in charge of these affairs at the time chose, and I don't know if it was voluntarily or involuntarily, because I tend to wonder if Mr. Ronald Reagan wasn't poisoned, that deliberately tried to nullify his mind, that everybody put him on the pedestal towards basically being dementia. I tend to wonder if that wasn't purposely done to Ronald Reagan, because Ronald Reagan probably wanted to expose the 9 tapes in regards to the biblical Bible prophecy. But he was overruled. He was overruled, he was overpowered. And of course, whenever he left office after his 8-year term, here come the Bush family that come right in under the coattail of the Reagans, gleaming and glorying in their own ideology of what their father, which would be the 43rd president's grandfather, began in the 20s pertaining to the oil market, or the 30s. In addition to what went on the Bush homestead right before 9/11, whenever a Saudi Arabian cousin of some sort wound up getting killed, supposedly in a helicopter accident. I don't know what motivated the evil demonic force towards wanting to take a bite out of the American people, other than it just being greed and selfishness pertaining to the Saudi Arabians that wanted to generate itself as being a China or an India or a Russia or an America or a Canada. Yeah, they wanted to make themselves known towards being the top dog on the international world stage. And they was willing to do this in any form or fashion to bring attention to their resources. Well, now they got our attention. They have had our attention for several years, but the only problem was America wasn't attacking the primary core of origin that started this to begin with, which, once more, being ruled by the Sharia laws in regards to disguising itself under the religion of Allah, in trying to make itself look like it had the appearances of being a good, sound religion. But the bottom line was this: it was a bunch of imposters that was walking around per se in sheep's clothing, but was raging wolves inside. This has costed the American people's lives. This has costed the American people's communities. This has costed the American people's livelihoods, to the extent that now we can look around and we can see the cracked roads, we can see the potholes, we can see the dilapidated bridges, we can see all the drugs that's come into the area pertaining to the illegal black market sales. We can see all the guns and all the violence from the guns. We see all the bloodshed, all the other rootlessness that's going on right here in America, that started out as a president by the name of Mr. Bush, Mr. Senior Bush, that said it looks like the Americans is going to hell in a handbasket. And beyond that point, we went backwards, not forwards, but backwards to the point of where we are today. Once more, we hear head chiefs of departments get on TV, including the president, and tell us that the buck stops here. Tell us that I'm solely responsible for these actions. We hear people from the Pentagon saying the same thing. But yet now we've heard nothing from the Bush administration. We have heard nothing from the Bush family. We've heard nothing from the old Reagan administration of people that has gotten wealthy, stinking filthy rich, while the rest of us got stinking filthy poor. In the meantime, if we did have a decent car, by running over that pothole and going over that bad road, now has diminished the quality of our automobiles to the point that they're basically worn out because it was having to go through so much rigmarole on the roads. And now we're suffering, not just with our automobiles, not just with our jobs, but now we're suffering with our health. We're suffering with our freedom. We're suffering as a nation, being almost or right at $30 trillion in debt. There has to be the proper accountability towards where we have gone in the past 30 plus years in regards towards a nation, a building nation that at one time stood on top as being the #1 nation in the world, that now we have dwindled and dwindled and dwindled to the point that we are becoming a third world nation. There has to be some sort of accountability of who to actually blame the blame game on, other than the previous administration that is in power, or the previous administration before this administration, which would have been Donald J. Trump. You have to go back to the original origin. And that's what I keep saying. That's what I'm going to continue to keep saying. That we have basically, Biden says that we succeeded in our objective towards eliminating bin Laden. Well, guess what? That was only one person. We've had military assignments before, black ops, whatever you want to call it, to where we didn't have to bring in a whole army just to take out 1 or 2 people. So, let me get this right. Between Saddam Hussein and bin Laden, this has jeopardized the future of our children and our grandchildren for decades to come. There has to be a better plan than this. And there has to be one of these eye-opening moments that I feel like that we're fixing to walk off into, especially since what's happened today pertaining to 12 American military personnel that's been killed and over 15 injured. There has to be an eye-opening moment to where somebody says, you know what? We really didn't get the bang for the buck for the past 25 or 30 years, have we? Considering that we was at one time in this status, and now we're over here in this status. What has caused that? What brought that on? That's the part that we need to look at in identifying who actually is in behind these evil deeds that terrifiably, intentionally has brought so much grief and sorrow to the American people's lives. That's basically all I'm going to say about this for now, because it has been an eye-opening moment today towards seeing and hearing what has occurred. I'm really surprised that it has went out and went off as smoothly as what it has, to the point that we haven't heard more about these type of events. Because over there, it's nothing uncommon for them to strap a suicide vest on even a child, a 10-year-old kid, and have that 10-year-old kid, after they've brainwashed him, take that 10-year-old kid and walk out into a school zone or a funeral procession or a wedding, and the 10-year-old kid pull the detonating cord that winds up killing himself, but at the same time winds up killing about 100, 150, 200 other people, and brings misery and sorrow to another 300 or 400 or 500 people. It's nothing uncommon for these people to do this in the name of Allah. And I'm telling you, that disguised enemy that all along has been trying to convince Americans that it's a good religion, that it's a religion of the holy, righteous God, they are so deceptive to the point that they have bamboozled the world in who and what their true intentions actually was. And as far as I'm concerned, all these nations right now that's suffering, regardless whether they're suffering financially, socially, economically, regardless whether they're suffering emotionally, spiritually, physically, as far as I'm concerned, this right here is in fact what has done it. If you don't cut the snake's head off, the snake will eventually multiply and grow larger and bigger and more powerful. And that's what the Americans, certain people working for the government, has set back and allowed to happen. And now we're all facing the consequences on account of it, towards high gas, no jobs, drugs everywhere, unsafe environment, $30 trillion in debt, that our future basically looks grim, to say the least, in comparison to where our ancestors was back in the 70s and the 80s, early 80s, that had a big, bright future towards where we was to go pertaining to the American achievements. You know, I looked it up last night. I felt like that it was deemable in looking it up. It was in 1997, whenever they finalized the ideology that R12 refrigerating Freon that they normally put in the older model cars got changed over completely from R12 to R134. And you may be saying to yourself, well, what's that got anything to do with all this? The point I'm trying to make is this: they began that phase in 94. They completed that phase in 97, coming into the year 2000. They was blaming global warming at that time on Freon. Okay? So this Freon that they used for an excuse obviously was not the problem, because we're continually experiencing the complications because of global warming. We knew, they knew, the experts knew, even throughout the 80s and the 90s, that we was doing irreversible damage to ourselves pertaining to the planet. And it has taken 30 plus years before we have all wakened up and realized the consequences in this type of behavior. I don't know if they done it out of greed, if they just wasn't smart enough to use alternative fuel pertaining to hybrid and electric vehicles and windmills and solar panels, or if they just didn't care. Maybe there was too much at stake towards the old way that they were still profiting off of. Well, now the same people that profited off of all that can now look back at all the people that has went in the hole because of that, and is still being trampled down because our insurance rates keeps going up every year, because the insurance companies keep having to be out money on these catastrophes that continue to keep bombarding the American people with. So, you know, it got out of scale, it got out of balance, going all the way back into that period of time that I keep telling you about since 1988, whenever 9 tapes wound up in the White House. In the early 90s, mid-90s, there was a movement understanding the depth of global warming. They even had some sort of a thing one time in that period of time where they thought it was cows that farted that could have been causing global warming. Any reason other than the reason of human consumption was they trying to blame on the world heating up every year. And like I said, now we're all facing the consequences of this that is costing not just the insurance companies, but is costing everybody in some form or fashion, just like the people as of last week that over 17 inches of rain dumped in Waverly, Tennessee in less than a 24-hour period that caused devastation on a biblical proportion. Just like all the wildfires out west that are continually bringing havoc to people's health and burning all kinds of good forestry and burning communities and families out. Just like the massive floods that we've seen down in Houston and the lower part of Louisiana for 2 or 3 times back to back in a row. There has to be some sort of accountability. And that's the only thing that I'm trying to get at here in regards to all this. Because, you know, we're just like a dog chasing after its tail. We're moving, but in actuality, we're not going nowhere. And in the meantime, we see other nations such as China, India, even Africa, Australia, places like that, that is merging. They're intensifying, they're growing. They've got architectural grand designs. They've got big buildings. They have modified islands into merging onto the ocean, and they have generated a great deal of ingenuity that actually is considered today as being state of the art. Why, in the meantime, we're all dumbfounded over here, or I say all, a great deal of us is dumbfounded to the point that now we're taking 1 step forward and 2 steps back. Thanks again for listening. Good luck to all of us. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. And may God, the holy, righteous God, bless the American people, bless the American military, and bless our endeavors towards where we are to go in the future with our endeavors towards trying to manufacture and manifest utopia and peace, not just for ourselves, but for the world. Shalom, and God bless.